President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden marked the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor by visiting the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. this morning. In the immediate days, months, and years following the December 7th, 1941 attack, Americans were unified and willing to fight for each other instead of against each other. Well, joining us now to reflect on that day and the lives that were given is former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor, great to see you.
Well, thank you, Sean. I know this is probably an even more sobering day for you. You've served in the United States Navy, so you probably have a different perspective than most Americans, and one that really gets close to home, just knowing that the service branch you served in was probably, without doubt, the one hit hardest on Pearl Harbor.
Unquestionable. But the thing that's so funny, and I watched this in interviews with World War II veterans, particularly the ones that were there, they always say, you know, we just did our job. We did what the country needed. There was this sense of the country being unified and focused and understanding that threat that we faced. And I feel like 80 years since then, we've got the AOCs of the world who focus on things that aren't about protecting the country, that don't understand the role of the military, that don't understand the threats. And I guess my question to you is, over the course of the 80 years, where do you think we drifted to get to this point now? Was it just the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, or do you think there's some inflection point?
Well, I think it's happening over a longer period of time, maybe at least a generation. But America's gotten soft. We've forgotten how precious freedom is. You would think that we would understand it better. People travel more. They can see the world. They can experience it by way of books and movies in a way that people 80 years ago couldn't and didn't. But the difference is, I think they take it for granted and they don't appreciate, they don't reflect upon what a great gift from God it is to be free, to have freedom of speech, to have freedom of assembly, to have freedom of religion, to be able to worship or not to worship, and not have the government telling us what we can and can't do. And over the past couple of years, Sean, we've seen when people have essentially surrendered to the government and said, oh, you don't want us to go to church? Fine, we won't go, we'll just stay home. You don't want us to go shopping, except in select stores that you pick? Well, great, we'll just do that. I worry for the country, because what happened 80 years ago today transformed the world. And in part because it united Americans. It made every American realize our freedom is precious, but it's vulnerable, and we're going to have to fight for it. If something like that happened today, gosh, I hope, but I'm not sure that that many young Americans would say, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. I'm ready to stand and defend freedom for the rest of my country.
Well, Governor, I think of another infamous attack that happened in my lifetime 20 years ago, 9/11, a horrific incident that took the lives of so many, which unified the country afterwards. It seems like sometimes people understand the reality of these threats until they happen. So how do we get ahead of that? How does America become unsoft, per se?
A lot of it has to go back to our schools. If we teach kids today that America's an evil country, if we teach them that they are inherently either a racist or a victim, then they're never going to be able to appreciate this country and what it represents. And they may not be willing to fight for it. That's why it's so important that at not only the college level, but even at the elementary, junior high, and high school level, that we give people an honest and realistic understanding that we're not a perfect nation, we never have been, but by golly, there's never been another like this. We've taken people from all over the world, from every culture, religion, ethnicity, from every gender. We've brought them to America. We've allowed them to come. They've become citizens. They've made their American dream come true. And no other country has brought the kind of prosperity and the kind of human potential that was brought to people coming to this nation ever in the history of mankind, and certainly nothing like this in such a short period of time. That's why I just believe that on this day, it'd be a great time for Americans to reflect upon the sacrifice of every single person who was at Pearl Harbor. I think of the USS Arizona, 1,177 people died that day. Only 333 on the Arizona survived. Only 75 are still alive today, 80 years later. We owe them an extraordinary debt of gratitude for just reminding us what heroism and true valor looks like.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more about the schools, right? And I also couldn't agree with you more about our country. We need to start telling people this is why people are coming, because we are the most amazing place on earth. I get it. The thing that I think is lacking, though, beyond that, is the threat that Lindsay was touching on. In other words, we got caught flat-footed in Pearl Harbor. We got flat-footed on 9/11. I worry about the threat that a terrorist poses, that China poses. And I think from that aspect, we've also gotten soft. Most people don't appreciate the threat that we face from those countries economically, but more important, militarily. We hand them things like TikTok. We allow the Chinese into our ports. We are not being the military giant that we need to be to protect our country, never mind the rest of the world. And the question is, how do we get that mentality back? Because that's the problem. You have leaders in Congress, or so-called leaders, that don't talk about and articulate the threat that places like China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia pose to us.
Well, and it's a real problem, Sean, when you've got the heroes of young people like LeBron James, who basically have sold out to the Chinese. They criticize America, but they do anything to keep from criticizing China because they're making so much stinking money from China.
Right.
Think about how much of our pharmaceuticals is coming from China, for God's sake. The supply chain crisis is really a reminder that we've sold out to the Chinese. We've allowed them to make the stuff that we used to make in America. I've always said there are three things America's got to be able to do to stay free. It's got to be able to fuel itself, have its own energy supply, has to be able to feed itself, have its own food supply, has to be able to fight for itself, have its own manufacturing base. President Trump was on our way to all three of those things. We had energy independence, we had a renewed understanding of the value of farming and feeding ourselves, and we were bringing manufacturing back. I'm watching this administration reverse every policy, and it's not about the politics of it. It's about what it does to preserve our freedom, being able to have independence when it comes to energy, food, and manufacturing.
Hi, Rob Carson here. If you love watching Newsmax, you're really going to love listening to our new podcast. It's called the Newsmax Daily. I host it, and I give you the best briefing of the big news of the day, top newsmaker interviews, and even, yes, a few laughs. I know it's hard to believe. So if you're driving, walking, exercising, just about anywhere, you can connect with the Newsmax Daily with me, Rob Carson. Find our podcast online or go to iPhone, Spotify, iHeart, Stitcher, and more, and start listening today.